Exactly.
The cost of education has just skyrocketed.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there anything in your kit bag that is addressing that?
I happen to think that competition is a great source of invention and improvement. And I see the advent of for-profit institutions of higher learning, which I know the president and his supporters don't like. I actually like the idea of competition in higher education. I remember when I was governor of Massachusetts, I cut the funding for University of Massachusetts by 10%. We had a budget crisis, and we cut it by 10%. The chancellor of the University of Massachusetts and I sat down. He said, "Thank you." So what do you mean? He said, "I've got whole departments here that no students have interest in. I was finally able to get rid of some of them, thanks to your taking those cuts." Our institutions of higher learning just keep on passing on higher and higher costs. They don't recognize that they need to compete. They need to keep their prices down. They need to keep their tuitions competitive. I was at a place in Florida called Full Sail University. They provide a 4-year degree for people in the entertainment world, production, media, broadcast, and so forth. And their school goes right straight through, no vacations. I think they have 100 studios for instruction. They run the studios in classes 24 hours a day because the physical structure is expensive. The incoming class, they bring a new class in every month, so that there's a graduating class every month, and they can place people. I mean, they hold down the cost of their education by recognizing they're competing. We're going to have greater competition among institutions of higher learning, and I believe that they're going to have to become productive. Two of the places that are the least productive in our society have done less to improve their cost and quality are healthcare and higher education, and by the way, K through 12 education as well. And bringing the dynamics of competition to those marketplaces, in my view, is the best way to bring down cost. I look at places like University of Phoenix and others. I think you're going to find students saying, "You know what? That's not a bad deal. I'm not willing to come out of college with $100,000 in debt." The alternative is to say the government's going to pay for that. And if the government starts writing checks for people to go to university, they'll just keep on raising their rates because there'll be no incentive to say we've got to hold our rates down in order to attract the best students. Now, of course, some of the big institutions have great scholarship programs and keep the cost down through those charitable contributions. But I'm not in favor of having the federal government start spending money which would only, in my view, raise the cost of tuition.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to follow up on the idea of for-profit colleges. Of course, we have a land-grant university here in Ames, so there's a lot of interest in higher education here. Is it, at least today, it is the case that degrees from Phoenix, Kaplan, what have you, are not particularly well respected, and those schools are not cheap, and those students are taking out federally subsidized student loans to then transfer tax money to these private for-profit institutions. How does that serve the country better than publicly owned and operated institutions?
Oh, that doesn't serve it better. I just like the fact that there's competition. I like the fact that institutions of higher learning will compete with one another, whether they're for-profit or not for-profit. The difference is pretty slim. If I look at a public institution and it pays its football coach $2 million a year, how that's different than a for-profit institution that earns $1 million profit a year, I don't know. But I can tell you that I think that students, being hopefully relatively smart, will look at different institutions and make a choice as to where their education dollar will get the best return. And in some cases they'll say it'll be University of Phoenix, or in others they'll say it'll be a land-grant university. In others it'll be Harvard and Yale. But I think I think we're going to get smarter about that, and schools will start competing. And as schools start competing, I think they're going to find they can't keep on passing along higher and higher tuition to students and demanding more and more from government, in part because government's going to have to cut back. We talk about students borrowing money from government. Well, government's borrowing money from China and from other nations. The borrowing in this country has got to stop. We've got to start living within our means. And I think you'll find both in healthcare and in education that competition will encourage better quality and ultimately a moderation in the rate of growth, if not a reduction in the high cost of education. Now, by the way, I'm not going to vouch for any particular university as being superior to another, but I think you'll find that young people will move to those places where their degree has the greatest value for their education or for their employment opportunities. Hope so.